Hello, November 2021 Complexity Weekend Cohort. I'm here with Shirley, a return facilitator and participant. So welcome, Shirley. Could we hear a little bit about your background or what brought you to Complexity Weekend?
Sure. Thank you, Daniel. I've actually been involved in this community now for a year, so it's been a wonderful journey of meeting really interesting people and learning a lot and learning specifically about things that I'm really questioning or have had a lot of questions about in my professional career. So my background, just in a nutshell, is that I spent a couple of decades working, developing affordable housing in the West, on the West Coast, excuse me, and studied policy, public policy, as a graduate student quite a long time ago. So a lot of times when people ask me about, how did you get here to this place, exploring complexity, I do often start with, a few years ago, I read a book on systems thinking. But truthfully, it's really a lifelong journey. I identify like discovering systems thinking as a kind of a milestone, but we're all on this journey from the moment we're born because we're experiencing the world as complex. I don't think there's much disagreement about that. It's like, well, what do we do about it? How do we act? How do we feel effective? Especially in areas that we care about. So it's really, been a lifelong journey for me. I do recall, though, kind of the beginning of my professional career, thinking about, a bit of a conflict coming up in my mind about, okay, I'm, spending a lot of my working time trying to help folks who are homeless, who have health conditions as well, and, social service needs. And really there was this conflict about, am I adding the value I need to? Am I doing, am I being effective? And it's interesting because more recently I've read some folks that are in complexity science or science in general who are talking about creativity and innovation. So for example, Murray Gell-Mann in The Jaguar and the Quark talks about going, I think, probably to an event in Aspen. And this is many, many years ago. But he was actually with a bunch of people who are creatives in many different areas. Artists, writers, scientists, and they were all, in talking with each other, they all had a common kind of grounding, and that was that they were kind of trying to answer something or figure out something that they couldn't find the answers for out there, in their fields, the traditional way or the typical way or the industry standard of how these different things were resolved. So, for example, an artist feeling this conflict. Oh, there's something that I want to express, but I don't. So anyway, this kind of exploration or journey or focus, but coming from a kind of a conflict. And so for me, like a conflict between how people are looking at reality and what you're trying to make happen in the world or something like that. So I think that that really resonates with me. Because I'm trying to do something and I feel like this, kind of almost compulsion. And complexity science has helped me think about things in a new way. And these are really about human, systems and our society. And so that's basically me in a nutshell. Or maybe that's a pretty big one. Not so little.
Thank you for sharing that. And I understand to kind of go deeper into that last point through some stories, which are one of the ways that we communicate and learn complexity. Through some stories, we're going to learn more about how that relates to homelessness. So I would love to hear about that.
Yeah. So I want to tell a story about nonlinearity to begin with. And so these are all real things that I've encountered. A few years ago, a well-regarded nonprofit organization wanted to address homelessness in their community. So they said, okay, we're going to commit to building 1,000 housing units in the space of 5 years or something like that. And then the second part of this was, and with this, commitment, we will reduce homelessness by 25%. So, what do these numbers mean? Well, basically, they're looking at an estimate of homelessness in their community. At a point in time, this is something that communities in the United States do, is count the number of homeless one night in January. Of course, that's a one night count. That's not really giving you a number that you can rely upon, but it gives you an idea. So anyway, they said, okay, since we're going to develop 1,000 units of housing, then we will reduce homelessness by 25%, because that is the proportion of total homeless people in our community. And so, in that way, I think that demonstrates, a very static way of looking at a phenomenon. So it isn't that, it isn't linear. It isn't linear. They're not really able to, and so many organizations are working very hard, and I respect, and I've also been part of that as well, to develop a lot of housing. But what we see basically on a macro level is that the kind of reflection of what happens at that macro level, it's not linear. It's not like, oh yeah, we've created all this housing, and so look it out. It's wonderful out there. We do know that yes, people do move from being on the street or doubled up or living in their car to housing, and that's a great thing. But it isn't a linear process. It's very dynamic, and so I think an understanding of that could be really helpful. And nonlinearity is a hard concept for us to understand, but it would be helpful, because then up front, we wouldn't be trying to address this phenomenon and thinking it's linear and static. Because in the end, we aren't successful at meeting those kinds of commitments. And I think that's then hard, for people to understand. It's demoralizing, and it's. I don't feel like it's a realistic way of looking at the phenomenon. And that brings me to a related concept, and that is emergence. So actually, this is quite recent, but I was attending a webinar, and one of the speakers was the head of data for a large nonprofit that I think maybe a year ago received a $100 million grant from the MacArthur Foundation. And this was a grant to address homelessness in the United States. And they have a data-informed process, like homeless people one by one, dashboards. We're going to do it. We're going to solve homelessness. But it's interesting because, the way I think about it, and in fact, the way he thought about it as well is, hey, we know what to do for individuals. We know how to move them from being homeless to housed. But we do not know how to do it at scale. We don't know how to address the issue from a systemic level. And I agree, because I think it is an emergent phenomenon where we can't just say, okay, this is what we do for this individual. Let's just multiply it by 1,000 or 4,000 or 10,000. There's also time that is involved here and physics. But I put those aside for now, just the building of housing, the time, and all of that. But it's an emergent dynamic phenomenon. And so I think an understanding of that can also help us, because it's misleading for people to talk about kind of linear solutions. Hey, we're going to multiply whatever we're doing by 10,000. And those are kind of the basic approaches that I feel like that are really common to hear. We just need to build more housing. That is the solution. It's really simple. It isn't actually simple. There is, and again, setting aside like housing production issues, because certainly we could be more efficient. But what we're really talking about is people, in my opinion. People who, and this is kind of the third story I want to tell. People who, have, and I am talking here about people who are chronically homeless. And in the United States, it's a definition. And it means that people, are basically long-term homeless, and they have serious mental illness and also chronic, substance abuse disorder. So these are people who are oftentimes also very ill. They have perhaps diabetes, heart disease, things that they've developed in their lives. So this is where I'm exploring path dependence. And path dependence basically is this idea that, the outcomes that we see are heavily influenced by the sequence of events and things that have happened in history. They're very influenced by that sequence. And here I feel like this is a really important concept that we don't talk a lot about when we talk about homeless people. And that is that a lot of times when we're trying to intervene and help people, they are already at that outcome stage of being, having serious mental illness, being very, very ill. And that's a waste of human potential. So the story that I want to tell, though, a specific one related to this is, actually a couple of years ago, I went to an Amazon Web Services conference that is geared. They typically have them once a year, but they're for nonprofit clients, for AWS, and also government. And so there the audience or the participants are all organizations, typically larger ones, that are working on all kinds of different social challenges, trying to help people in different communities, sometimes internationally, nationally. So at one point during the conference, we went through an exercise, and I think this, for people who don't know, there's a process at Amazon called working backwards. And essentially, it's basically thinking about the customer and their first, and thinking about their needs and problems and finding solutions. But an interesting part of it was, so we went through this exercise as a group, and they encouraged us to, select a problem that we're working on. So I did select homelessness as my problem. And they do encourage, you to think about crazy. Maybe that's not the appropriate word, but, just unconventional, out of the box solutions. And because, I had been working in this area, have been for a long time, I really struggled with that. But then I thought, I propose the solution to homelessness to be time travel. And the way I explain this is, I don't believe time travel is possible, but it is related to path dependence. And it was a tool, really, because I shared it with the group, and it was a large group of people. And they what I said was something that I said a few minutes ago, that for chronically homeless people, in fact, their lifespans may be shortened by a couple of decades already because of the life conditions that they've lived in for so long. And so it's like, can we turn back time and those sequence of events to avoid those outcomes? And, certainly there are a lot of movies like that where, you go back in time and, things change, kind of the butterfly effect. But here, it was really about thinking and highlighting this basically on an individual level, and then perhaps you could look at it from a more population-based level. But these life events that we experience have influence on our outcomes. And can we, build systems or encourage systems to be more supporting of, kind of individuals, earlier in their lives, rather than, spending, as we do, a lot of resources on people when they are in such dire conditions. So anyway, those are the stories in a nutshell, Daniel.
Thank you, Shirley. Are there any last comments or any advice that you'd want to give to a participant? Otherwise, this is really an awesome conversation, so thank you.
Yes. I think what I really want to explore further is, to the extent that we can use complexity science or concepts that are in complexity, to the extent that we can use them specifically for homelessness, but other kinds of human social issues. Is it helpful or relevant to use these concepts as metaphors, analogies? And then where might we be misleading? This is what I'm exploring. To what extent can we or should we apply complexity science here?
Great. Provocative question. So thank you, Shirley. Looking forward to seeing you on Keybase and Gather as always.
Thank you, Daniel.
Bye.
Bye.